Rise, people of our cult. Rise, people of the frozen shards. Our savior and leader is here. That Dane the Iceberg made. Hi guys, it's me again, back again with another quirky Iceberg video. Haha. Welcome to the cult's Iceberg Explained. This iceberg is filled with the many cults of the world, both in the past, present, and even weirdly in the future. I mean, there are cults, so what do you expect here? In this video, we will not only show you the cults, their glorious leaders, and their weird faiths, but also their many tragedies, horrific events, and even attacks on normal people. This video is filled with the horrors of man, which shows not only how some people will do anything for their own power or insane mind, but also that some people will follow some random leader to the deepest and darkest depths of man just because they believe in them so much. So join the cult of Dane, not an actual cult, and prepare as you enter the dark and hollow groups, clans, and cults of the world. Also, I want that guy shot in the honor of Ralph A. Clevenger. Also, join the community Iceberg today. More info on the Discord. Okay, the first cult on this list is actually more of a kind of cult than a cult in itself, but we'll look into some examples in a bit. So, cargo cults are a cult made of usually indigenous peoples on islands who are near abandoned by the outside world. These indigenous people have then formed cults in where they believe that one day the bigger and more advanced nations of the world will arrive with cargo to help them live and support a better life. One of the bigger cargo cults can be found on the islands in the Melanesians. This cult was born during the Pacific War, where some of the most advanced nations fought a modern war with planes, ships, and amphibious invasions right off the island. This was something the islanders, which had never evolved past the agricultural revolution, saw as godly. They had hardly even seen metal, and now they see these gods fighting on the seas. Both the Americans and Japanese arrived on these islands and made friends with the locals so they could use the area as bases. As both sides began to airdrop goods on these islands, the islanders jumped some 1,000 years ahead in technology, which therefore made the soldiers look like gods. As the Americans left the bases on these islands as the war was over, the natives prayed that one day these Americans would return with modern day goods. To this day, they have made rituals and religious areas where they pray to the Americans. They march like the soldiers did, they wait on the abandoned runway, and have even made their own control towers with fake headphones and all. To this day, they are still waiting for Uncle Sam to return with some modern day goods, which the US just kind of should do, just for shits and giggles. Be hilarious. The Children of God, which has gone by many names, is an American Christian cult based in California, which has been heavily criticized for abusing its members and being extremely authoritarian. Actually, the term American Christian cult is used so frequently in this iceberg that I'm just gonna call them ACCs, for shortening. Yeah, that sounds fitting. At one point, this cult was so large that it had 10,000 members, which also included some very popular names like Jeremy Spencer and even Joaquin Phoenix and his family. Yeah, the Joker in a Christian cult, you can't make that shit up. David Berg, the founder and leader of the cult, used many methods to try and get people to join, like preaching about doomsday, appealing to the hippies, and even so-called flirty fishing, where sex was used to show God's love and mercy. Don't call it that. The cults have gone through many phases and names, but ultimately stayed the same. A cult where the upper echelons abused new members, lying to outsiders, and is generally a lot of sexual abusing. River Phoenix, Joaquin Phoenix's brother, who had been a member of the cult for years, said that the cult ruined people's lives. And for what? Power, money, and sex. That evil, attractive triangle.
Tell me in a sentence who you are. Nobody.
The Manson family, also just called the Family, thanks Vin Diesel, was a cult led by the infamous madman Charles Manson, who led some 100 people to do his bidding in a drug-induced gang of actual well-off people who had fallen for his teachings. And yes, it is an ACC. They believe that Manson is a reincarnation of Christ. And to that I must say that Christ has taken a bad turn. Christ. The cult was made mostly up of young girls from well-off families, who was radicalized by Manson and his hippie cult. Apparently, all you need to make a cult in the 60s was some drugs, a Bible, and some good charisma. These girls did a bunch of crime with the hallucinating mob boss, like petty theft, robberies, assault, and even murder. Why? Well, because there's nothing more important than family. That's it. It even got to a point where some of the members actually murdered Sharon Tate and some of her guests simply because Mason told them to. As it seems, Manson had charisma like no one else, and would easily find people's weak point, which he then exploited. However, Manson's cult personality might have come already from a young age, since he lacked a father figure and his mother was extremely drunk all the time. He also moved like no tomorrow and was somehow always in a bad environment. Today, the cult is basically nothing more, since Mason, the head honcho, died in 2017 and did, funny enough, not do anything like Christ did. Scientology is a cult that has gone on for a while and is still going on strong to this day. Whilst not being an ACC, it still holds a cross and its symbol is American and is defined as a cult, so almost there, I guess. It was made by a scientist fiction writer, L. Ron Hubbard, who was kind of a Jesus figure in this religion. He didn't claim to be Jesus, but more or less had the same roles as Jesus, being the man that was gonna save humanity, or rather the Scientologist. He's also, like Jesus, coming back one day, which is why every Scientologist church has an untouched office just for him. Their belief is a long and ludicrous one, even being so weird that South Park made fun of them. And therefore, it is complete malarkey. The Church of Scientology claims that the soul is everlasting and that only the human body can die. The soul can also be helped through different rituals, and is immortal. Whilst being a pure scam, being away from the elites to get the money, and is a rather abusive fold, it's still going strong and has some notable figures among their ranks. They even have HQs and centers all around the globe, even in Copenhagen, which I've seen in person, and entered whilst drunk with 5 friends. However, that's a different story, but don't worry about it. A cult of personality can be seen as a kind of cult where the national leader is portrayed in an almost outstanding positive light by the use of propaganda, media control, and different kinds of powers in a way of securing the support of the population. Even though it actually doesn't matter, I mean, it's a dictatorship, what are you gonna do? It has been used many times in many different countries with many different ideological backgrounds, although it is almost always done by authoritarian or totalitarian countries. Mussolini, Stalin, Mao, Franco all tried to make themselves look like something above human, like some great force, which is the pure reason for the state's success and aliveness. However, even though dictatorships end here and there, the cult can still stay. In Italy, the Italians had seen through the many lies of Benito and began a civil war. So that one didn't last. Stalin's cult of personality was ended after he died, and Khrushchev just said, "Aye, this shit whack," and then just more or less ended the cult right then and there. Well, slowly at least. And then there is Ho Chi Minh, where there are still many statues of him to this very day, and is still seen as a kind of national hero, which he is in the eyes of the Vietnamese. So even though Ho Chi Minh is long gone, his cult is still kind of there. Not as strong, but he's still around and adored. But again, a cult of personality is a bit more than just adoring someone. But just like dictatorships, cults of personality will always reappear, whether we like it or not. Aum Shinrikyo, which is now known as ALF, is a doomsday cult and terrorist group located in Japan, and the group is rather hated by the Japanese population. The group has committed several terrorist attacks, which always happens out of the blue and takes some people with it. However, it is usually around Tokyo. The belief of the cult is surrounded by the teachings of the founder and leader of the group, Shizu Matsumoto, who has made his own form of Buddhism, which he calls original Buddhism. Except his beliefs are rather unorthodox and modern to some degree even. Since this is a doomsday cult, they believe that the world is gonna end in a nuclear Armageddon after the US starts World War III. They apparently also want to escalate this whole ordeal for some reason, as they've tried to destabilize the country for a while. They have gassed metros, entered families of their enemies and killed them, and weirdly, have even made a video game where you plan a terrorist attack. I'm just gonna stick to TF2, right? I'm not playing a terrorist game. They're still active to this day, and are probably gonna do something bad in the future. Who knows? Huh. I expected some weird things from Leto, but not a damn cult. Well, to be honest, this isn't the greatest cult in the world, but still, let's see Paul Allen's cult. And as it seems, it was him and his band who jokingly made a cult in Croatia, as a bunch of different fans were invited to an island where they hosted a 3-day-long music and movie bender. Sounds fun. They tweeted out, "Yeah, this is a cult" on Twitter, which seems to have crossed the thin red line, as some people began to speculate the seriousness in this tweet. And yes, it's a joke. Jared Leto didn't make a cult. He isn't a clown, but he's a bit of a joker. NXIVM is an American cult that is far from Christian in practice. The cult is a type of private held business that specializes in sex trafficking. What a business to invest in. The whole cult seems to be a bunch of scammers trying to use all illegal moves they can do to reach the top. Human trafficking, pyramid schemes, sexual slavery, you name it, if it's illegal, they'll fucking do it. Despite being a bag of skanks, they also act like a regular company, where they even hold seminars and lectures, and even hire people. You know, for an office, not that whole traffic thing, I think. But I wouldn't mind going to one of those lectures though. I mean, what are they gonna tell me? What to find Mexican traffickers? Tch, like I don't already know that. Sebek is a god in the ancient Egyptian mythology, who is a ruler of a bunch of things. He's a god of pharaonic powers, fertility, and military prowess. Therefore, he was associated with the Nile crocodile. It's a kind of fish in those three areas. The ancient Egyptians really loved and practiced their gods. Some sources even say that each city had a specific god they symbolized and worshipped. I mean, they worshipped all, but they had a specific god in mind for that city. However, in the middle region called Fayum, just south of the delta, Sebek was exponentially worshipped as he held an important place for the inhabitants of the area. It got to a point where a kind of cult grew from the simple god, as large building projects began simply to honor the god. Despite that, they also had different interpretations of him and his abilities. However, at some point, it just kind of died out, like the mythology did. Kinda sad. The Anthill Kids were not an ACC, but a CCC, a Canadian Christian cult. While it might bear more of a QCC since it was a Quebecan cult, but still. Also, like the rest, they like anything Christian related. In Saguenay, I think, Quebec, a man known by the name of Roch Tirayant lived an average Quebecan life as a smart kid in the Thetford mines. However, despite being a clever kid, he dropped out of school in 7th grade and began to dive deep into Christian lore. He was apparently scared by the mythology of Christianity and thought that the end of the world was near. His fear took the greater of him. He converted to Catholicism and began the life of a pure Christian, free of unhealthy food, tobacco, and fun. He began a cult called the Anthill Kids at the age of 30, not a kid, in Sainte Marie. From there, he began to do speeches, made a commune, and told of the life a Christian should live. However, it all began to go downhill. The speeches became more and more about the end of the world, which would happen in 1979, but hold on a goddamn second. I'm still here. Yeah, his visions of an ending world never came true, which made some doubt his role as leader. After that, he began to drink more and more and became hell authoritarian. And that gives me deja vu. But hey, hold on, this madman gets deeper down the cult leader hole. Trust me, there's more than just that. As his mind begins to slip, he says it's required for all women in the cult to be impregnated by him if they want to join, making him a father of 26 kids, and he was in none of their lives. Along with that, he began to beat disloyal members with belts and hammers, and a general abuse began to arrive among the Anthill kids. It all ended after he assaulted a member called Gabrielle Lavelle, who was hit in the head with the blunt side of an axe, pinned down on a table with a knife, got her fingers cut off, and finally cut her arm off with a chainsaw. Somehow, Lavelle escaped and got a hold of the authorities and got Theriol arrested, which was more or less a death blow, as the cult was abandoned and Theriol was thrown in jail for life. However, as he spent his time in jail, he still conceived 4 children with some loyal members. And that is why you stay in school, kids. Okay, before anything, that is the ugliest flag I've ever seen. And I've seen the Jutland flag. These two shouldn't represent anything at all. Anyways, vexology aside, the Davidians were an ACC with some Jewishness over it, which had gone through many weird phases. Although before I tell you about that, I can talk about the general gist of these blokes. They were a commune that was centered in New Mount Carmel Center in Elk, Texas, near Waco. It all began with a Seventh-day Adventist, where after a Bulgarian immigrant called Hutef came and tried to reform the group with the use of some tracts. After they rejected his offers, he just said, well then I don't want to, and then he made his own Adventist group called the Davidians, where they made New Mount Carmel Center their new kind of headquarters, and prepared for the second coming of Christ. After Hutef died in 1955, the group changed to a belief that the end of the world was around the corner in 1959, which, holy damn, didn't happen. This kind of killed the group, which then went through different owners, leaders, and thoughts. However, when a certain David Koresh appeared, he quickly became dude number 1, who radicalized and advanced the cult. They began a lot of illegal activity, which the state picked up, and tried to raid Mount Carmel in 1993, which ended in the Waco Siege, a bloody bath which took lives on both sides. A shootout between the US AFT agents and the illegally armed Davidians erupted on February 28th of that year. However, it gets worse, as 76 Davidians died during a fire amidst a siege on April 19th that same year. Men, women and children lay dead after they stuck to a cult which led to no good for anyone. After that, the cult, like the Mount, went up in flames and died. The movement of the restoration of the 10 Commandments of God, or for short, IMTRT, was a Christian doomsday cult in Uganda. The 2 original creators called this claimed that none other than the Virgin Mary had told them through visions that the world was going to end after the millennium switch from 1999 to 2000. After that event, the cult began to grow as more and more members began to believe that the world was going to end on January 1st, 2000. However, Mary didn't say anything about the 10 Commandments of God or restoring them at all. And as you're gonna see, they didn't really care about those commandments actually. As the date got closer and closer, the cult of the long name had gathered about 925 members, who were waiting for the end of the world. But spoiler alert, I can't keep doing this, of course it didn't end. Welcome, hello, we're alive. So, oh no, it wasn't actually after that date, it was actually March 17, 2000. And living is nice in this time of year, so again, big whoop. However, on that doomsday, they were all invited to a huge party where there were served 3 whole roasted bowls and some 70 crates of soft drink. They were gonna die the good way because God is good. However, the top leaders of the cult were not. A huge explosion could be heard in the city around the building, and the entire gathering was surrounded by flames. Even though only 530 members actually went to the party, they all died in the flames. And the rest, which didn't make it to the party, weren't safe either, because they'd been poisoned, and the majority died. At first, people didn't actually know what had happened, and it was ruled out as a mass cult suicide. But as people dug up the rubble and began to investigate, they realized that none of those who had died really wanted to partake in a suicide or killing event. This was all a deed done by the leading figures who made their own doomsday of a kind. We don't actually know where they are since that very date, but there are two scenarios which might explain where they are, right now and before the murders. One scenario is that they were among those who died in the building and was burned up with the rest of them so they would die with their cult. However, the second scenario, which is the more believed one, is the two members who led the cult just killed all the members and fled somewhere else. We've never seen them since, so they're most likely in hiding, and again we don't know where. That one night, the entire cult and everything about it went up in flames and went away. The Order of Nine Angels, or just ONA, is an international satanic neo-Nazi group, which is based in the UK. They are associated with and are allied with groups like North Front, Atomwaffen Division, and Black Order. So these Satan Nazis don't fuck around. And despite being mainly satanic, they are also opposed to the Church of Satan and the Temple of Set, most likely because they are kind of soft compared to the ONA. The ONA sees them as cowards who doesn't embrace the true power of Satan. They've been dubbed the most extreme satanic group in the world, as opposed to almost everything but themselves, and the members are filled with terrorists and murderers. They follow what they call traditional Satanism, which involves a lot of things like esoteric return to old norms, a focus on self-mastery, and Nietzschean self-overcoming, and a national socialist political stance. Since they know that an organization like theirs would never be seen as legitimate in the modern world, they try and gain influence in other ways, like accelerationism, where they kind of make as much chaos and anarchy through the world to try and ruin it. To this day, the group is still operational and wants to spread chaos around the world. So, watch out, I guess? I mean, there are like 9 people, but still. Ah, 4chan, I love this place. You know, trolling is always a bit of fun in people's eyes. But on 4chan, it's something else. It's a lifestyle. Kind of. System Space Cult was an apparent cult which began on 4chan by a guy called Suki. According to him, and Elon Musk also, the world is nothing more than a simulation called life, which is controlled by someone, I guess. Aliens? Who knows? However, according to Tsuki, the world is going to fall as it has faulty coding, which is going to ruin the future. But don't worry, Tsuki knows in real life coding and can bring you into an afterlife called LFE, or LV. These so-called migrants want to visit and live in this LFE coded world, as it is kind of a utopia. Most people see it as a kind of ghost in the shell superworld, while others see it as a free space, where everyone is important and with endless amounts of species. It's a kind of doomsday cult, which imagines an afterlife fitting for people living in a late-stage capitalist world. However, you have to die before the 1st of July 2017, or else you will just never enter. It kind of enforced people to die before then, putting a big emphasis on suicide. So some saw it as 4chan trolling people to commit suicide. However, it kind of took a weird turn when it was revealed that Suki was an actual 16-year-old Dutch person with some sanity problems, as his second world had grown in his head since the age of 12. And at this point, he couldn't really find a difference between his imaginary world in his head and the real world. He also refused professional help as he wouldn't want to lose touch with his perfect world. And this being 4chan leaves us with 2 stories. One, some guy actually believed in an alternate space program world and wanted people to join his suicide pact to ensure that they would enter this perfect world. Or 2, it was 4chan trying to prank people into committing suicide. I mean, it would be something they would do. I mean, it's 4chan, but we don't know if it's the case. Love always wins, baby. Except in this scenario, I would say they lost. But that wasn't really love, I'd say. The cult's foundation began in Dallas, Texas, where a normal family lived a normal life. Among them was Amy Carlson, a straight-A student who might be a bit nerdy. But, of course, something unusual had to happen before a girl like her would make an intergalactic billion-year-old cult. And it did. However, it's kind of hard to explain. In her early adult life, she just began to ramble on about random and irrelevant things like starships, deeper galaxy, and even took a fascination with the New Age religions. As she dove deeper and deeper into forums on the web, she met a guy called Amarith White Eagle, who convinced her that she was a divine being, and Carlson just kind of believed it. In fact, she believed it so much that she left her family with wife and kids to live out in the wilds of Colorado. Here, the cult, first known as the Galactic Federation of Light, began with 2 members. You know who. What's interesting about this is that she also began a YouTube channel and a Twitch where she made content since 2009. It is here more and more people began to join in as her theology began to shape, a mix of New Age spiritualism, conspiracy theories, and even a bit of Abrahamic religions. The main part of the religion, though, was that Carlson was a godmother, as all members called her, who was about 19 billion years old, who had been reincarnated many times and had birthed all living things and all living beings on Earth. Then also took a weird Republican turn where she claimed that Trump was her father and that the cult supported QAnon, which just kind of fit in there for some reason. It has absolutely nothing to do with anything at all, it just kind of happened. And as any cult, she couldn't control this amount of power, as 20 or more members were abused, sleep deprived, and used to force her fake energy care programs, her apparent COVID-19 cure, and her YouTube channel. Starting a cult to grow your channel. Doesn't sound half bad. I mean, shut up. However, the cult couldn't last forever, as about early April 2001, yeah, not that long ago, she became paralyzed from the waist down and looked like she was dying. Which she was. Well, the thing is that we don't know when or how she died. It might have been from the large amount of alcohol she consumed, which was also banned by other members to drink except her, but we don't really know. All we do know is that we found the mummified corpse entire weeks after her death. Why? Well, apparently, when the cult found her dead body, they refused to bury it or call officials. Instead, they made her into a shrine, put her in a bag so that the face would face out and could be seen, and plucked her eyes out. This was dubbed abuse of a corpse, as police entered the house and soon after the cult was in ruins. The Circle of Friends might sound like a fun TV show, but it was a capitalist Sigma male grindset commune. The name doesn't really fit, to be honest. Usually cults are made from communes where everyone shares in burdens and debts to live a more affordable and happy life together. However, this commune was not about sharing with anyone. It was a group of wannabe investors, CEO, company owners, and basically a bunch of people who wanted to live that rich capitalist life. It was made by a Hungarian called George G. Juszczyk, who moved to the US in hopes of finding the American dream, where he just kind of made his own. It's not a real cult without some kind of doomsday prophecy. Juszczyk foresaw a huge crash in the economy and the political world before 2000, where only the most rich, aka them, could survive. He taught lectures for about twice a week, which lured some people in. What lured in even more people was his claim that he could make anyone rich. Yes, the cult's main mission was not to survive this devastating crash in the economy. No, it was a customer, who they were always gonna make healthy, wealthy, and wise. And they did that actually. The group began to consist of wealthy businessmen who owned real estate businesses, security firms, investments, and construction companies. There was a religious aspect to this cult, which was a Gnostic Christian belief with some spiritual and racial theory, which made them think they would survive the crash, but that isn't that important. The main thing is that they had the grind set to survive the destruction of Earth. However, nothing happened before 2000 that we all know, but it actually doesn't matter because the cult didn't even last that long. And how did this cult crash and burn? Well, through the most capitalist way ever. Mass fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. Fuck, I love these guys. They're like the capitalist comedy relief of this iceberg. One taste doesn't really revolve that much about taste, but rather that sweet purrs. I'm just gonna go clean my mouth now, that was disgusting. One Taste is a company of sorts which specializes in the teaching of the practice of orgasmic meditation and slow sex. They made an entire company about that, but I guess that kind of stuff sells quickly, so why not? It is also influenced by Eastern philosophy and Buddhism, after a Buddhist monk taught one of the founders, called Nicole Cadon, about the so-called orgasmic meditation. It doesn't say when or where, but I kind of just imagine it was a monk trying to trick foreigners. It's most likely called One Taste because the company compares sex with food, that you can linger and enjoy food without chewing it down. You know, just like sex. It gained popularity by the very easy commercialization, since, you know, it is just sex and yoga after all. Teens flock to these sessions like nothing else. Apparently this was very popular as the company became one of the most growing companies in the world in 2014. But again, stuff tends to go wrong on here. It was revealed it was just a giant pyramid scheme with cult-like conditions which led to an FBI investigation. And with that, they apparently found links to prostitution, sex trafficking, and violation of labor laws. Damn, One Taste, that is how you meditate. The House of Yahweh is a cult based in Texas, USA, and since it's in Texas, the cult should be called the House of Yeehaw. The House of Yahweh can be seen as a kind of extremist Jewish cult which sees most religions, even the own religion it's based off of, as not true religions. The cult follows the word of Yahweh, who is apparently the oldest and real God in the world. One of the creators, Jacob Hawkins, had returned from a long 7-year visit to Israel, where he had apparently seen the word of Yahweh, which was older than the word of God or anything else. They believed that every other religious being, whether that be Jehovah, Jesus, and even, again, a God, was false prophets, pagan beliefs, and false idols, which shadowed the true way to the only one God. Despite looking down on Jews, Christians, and Jehovah's Witnesses for following apparently pagan gods, they actually followed a mix of these religious aspects. They wore Jewish clothing and ate kosher, they lived a Christian household life, and refused to celebrate Christmas, Easter, and birthdays, as they were again pagan traditions. Despite taking pride in Yahweh, their religion seems to focus more on purging paganism and pagan traditions more than anything else. They've also tried to foresee the end of the world, and you know how that goes. Still alive. They also entered some legal problems, as is tradition with these cults. Sexual abuse, child abuse, and incest. Man, these cult leaders just can't keep it in their pants. Or stop hurting children. Or both. Put on your tinfoil hat, folk, as this cult, the Universe People, is what everyone kind of thinks of when they hear the word conspiracy theorist. The Universe People are a Czechoslovakian group of mystics who believe in a lot of weird stuff. The first thing they actually did was to make a UFO religion, where they believed that they could talk with aliens in a faraway extraterrestrial universe. They want to make more contact, but for now, they can only talk with them through their minds. However, most people didn't really care about this cult. It's just some loonies. Well, that was until 1997, when Heaven's Gate said goodbye to the world in a mass suicide. Now, these Universe People are very interesting to talk to. They began to appear on TV, where they preached about the situation of humanity and aliens, where everyone got a good laugh. It didn't help that much, but I guess it was kind of fun. And, you know, they got their message across, so win-win. They also took it a step further and declared that aliens were dangerous, and that people should prepare themselves for a future alien attack by saurians, aka lizard people. Even more of a laugh. And yes, they took it a step further. In 2007, they gave instructional CDs, letters, and material to the Slovak military and police security services to try and explain and show how the Slovakian nation should protect itself against the future alien attacks. Their leader, Bent, also said on TV that the Slovakian people should be concerned since the Slovakian military didn't know how to defend against aliens. And wouldn't you feel more safe if they knew how to? While no one actually took them seriously, the Czechs and Slovakian people did enjoy their lectures as humorous both online and in real life. So in the end, a fun laugh. But still, they do believe aliens are gonna attack at any moment, so watch out. The Trinidad colony, also called Colonia Trinidad or the Trinidad Colony, was a kind of cut-off village from the rest of Chile where it was located. While it was inhabited by some Chileans, it was mainly inhabited by Germans, who had fled Germany after the Second World War, where they could find safety from the Allies and Western capitalism. The colony was made by Germans, and German was the mandatory language. It was even led by a German called Paul Schaeffer, who had left West Germany in 1966, not because of his past war crimes, but because of his past cases of child abuse after trying to make an orphanage. In the colony, he could find safety from the West German police. Trinidad was a strict colony with barbed wire walls, watchtowers, searchlight, and rarely any communication with the rest of Chile. While mostly left alone, the colony got an ally after Augusto Pinochet took over the country, but the Germans and their Nazi past was more than happy to keep some alleged communist prisoners. Inside the barbed wire walls of the colony, so-called enemies of the state were kept and mistreated, with the blessing of Pinochet. Besides them, the children weren't safe either, with Schauffer around, who got more cases of child abuse after Pinochet left, or fell at least. Before Schauffer left the colony though, it was a continuation of the Nazi German Reich, with links to anti-Semitism, racism, and some Nazis even lived and visited the place. Even Joseph Mengele, the so-called Nazi Angel of Death, visited the camp sometime. Schaeffer was an authoritarian figure where all power went through him. However, after leaving Chile because of those child abuse cases, the camp began to open up and is no longer the same kind of colony. The colony is now in fact a tourist attraction with a democratic system. However, the past of the camp divided people. Some said that the colony was fine since inhabitants loved being there. However, those who are against it hate them since they not only aligned themselves with Pinochet, but killed and tortured a bunch of people. To this day, there are still protests about that whole colony thing, even though it's over. Los Nagos Satánicos, which for those that don't speak Spanish, like me, means the drug Satanists, so a lovely bunch. It was led by Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo, who was born in a Catholic Cuban-American family, which had some problems. That being the constant lack of father figures. And I say constant and father figures because his mother, De la Aurora Gonzalez, switched from husband to husband since they either left or died. Also, a non-fun fact, Aurora gave birth to Constanzas at the age of 15. Goddamn, hopefully got caught. The family moved around in Florida, Puerto Rico, and Mexico, while Constanzo began to stumble over something else than Catholicism. As he lived in Florida, he became an apprentice to a local cursora, who taught a religion of sorts called Palo Mayombe, aka witchcraft, spells, and animal sacrifice. As his mother began to marry a drug dealer and his spells got more and more violent, he slowly began to make a kind of ring around himself. During his time in Mexico City, he just kind of naturally fell into the drug cartel ring, as you apparently do in Mexico City for some reason. The many drug dealers enjoyed his sacrifice performances and others enjoyed his violent being, and slowly, Los Nagos Satánicos was formed. Constanza's way of making rituals involved putting, among others, body parts, bones, and more in a cauldron and mixing it around. It was said that these sacrifices actually helped him grow and the cartel grow as well. He not only began to raid graveyards for ingredients like bones and bodies, but also one day that he wanted something bigger and grander than just dead bodies. He wanted a grand sacrifice which would surely expand the drug trade. He needed an alive, intelligent brain, which would surely involve powers. While he was far from new at this whole murdering business at this point, he had mostly killed, drug-related people like enemies and whatnot. However, he needed a smart brain and not a drug brain. Therefore, he kidnapped and tortured and then killed an innocent and uninvolved pre-med student from Texas who was sacrificed. This got the US police involved, who chased down the satanic drug lords. While Constantis committed assisted suicide, most other members were arrested for drug trafficking, murder, and much more. And that was a gruesome end to a gruesome cult of murdering narco-satanics in Mexico. Yeah, boarding schools can feel like a cult sometimes. Never been there, but I could imagine it. This boarding school, however, was something that could feel like a cult. The Elan boarding school was a private co-educational school placed in Poland, Maine, USA. God, I hate US names. It was built on a former hunting lodge and was active from 1970 to 2011, when it was shut down after people realized how brutal the place was. It was a place of strict obedience and punishment for those that stood out of line or failed. This ranged from physical abuse to mental abuse to even degrading tasks like cleaning the urinals with a mere toothbrush. Sometimes they would also starve the children. It was so strict that smiling without permission could lead to punishment. Just sit there and hate life, and that is an order. Sometimes even students went in on it, when there was formed human boxing rings where the students could beat the shit out of each other without teacher intervention, but in fact, encouragement. The beating was meant to make people more strict and make them more better and behave better. I mean, who are these teachers? Beating the shit out of a student is the opposite of good behavior. Apparently, some of these kids even died there, as a case from December 1982 showed that a student on the school called Phil Williams was reported dead after one of the boxing ring sessions. However, in 2011, this nightmarish place was over, as the state and parents had had enough of this school's abusive nature and it was closed down permanently. And now it is no more. Left Tahor can be seen as a kind of Jewish extremist group, a bit like what the Taliban is to the Muslim world, at least in the sense of politics, culture, and tradition. Left Tahor, which is Hebrew for pure heart, is an international Jewish group which advocates for fundamentalist Jewish practice and support an extremist version of Jewish law, which is kind of extreme when you remember that the Jewish law is already filled with different laws. So an extreme version of that is kind of extreme. The cult performs lengthy praying sessions, arrange marriages between teen members of the group, and says that all girls and women shall be dressed from toe to top in black covering, just like girls in the Taliban management are, at the age of 3 even. You would think that a group who loves Judaism so much would reside in Israel, but they've in fact traveled across the entire world, picking up Jews along the way. They've been to the US, Canada, Mexico, Romania, Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and currently reside in North Macedonia. They travel around so much mostly because they get kicked out of the country for being troublemakers or an immoral force inside the country, which they don't want to foster. Another reason is their intense illegal activity. Despite dedicating their entire life to a law depicting how to be good humans, they seem to not care much about anyone who isn't them. And that goes for regular Jews as well. They have kidnapped Jewish kids, abused kids among their own and others even, and have been involved in drugs, sexual abuse, and maybe even more. They are still active to this day and are looked down upon by most others. Even the most strict Orthodox Jews see them as an extreme and in some case un-Jewish force. Somewhere on the web, far down, not in the deep web, but right here on the web you reside, a group of extremists can be found. A group of people so lonely, so desperate for attention, that they've made the worst thing on earth. A thing so terrible, yet so powerful, that it has grasped the life of many people, some even dedicated to the craft of this one thing. And what might this dark force be? This thing that captures evil people and makes them even more evil? Well, it's icebergcharts.com. This is the meme part, I'm sorry. But when you say it's a kind of cult, I mean in the end we all hail someone, whether that be Coda, Walrus, Wendigoon or Dead Dane, just as an example. And look at this dangerous thing, the Deep Dark. It can teach you the most deepest and darkest thing in the world. From illegal sites to murderers and tactics on how to make bombs. No, for real, it's like, it just fucking sucks, this part. I can't do this. It was been seriously good this entire time, now it's just meme territory. Anyways, strap in and strap on. We're going deeper.